Vatican City pursued a policy of neutrality during World War II under the leadership of Pope Pius XII. Although the city of Rome was occupied by Germany from September 1943 and the Allies from June 1944, Vatican City itself was not occupied. The Vatican organized extensive humanitarian aid. The Lateran Treaty of 1929 with Italy recognized the sovereignty of Vatican City. It declared Vatican City a neutral country in international relations and required the Pope to abstain from mediation unless requested by all parties. In 1939, the city-state was recognized by 38 nations. As early as April 1939, the Pope announced plans for peace, hoping to mediate the current situation in Europe between the major powers. The first leader contacted was Benito Mussolini, and with his approval, he contacted the nuncios in Paris, Warsaw, and Berlin. Also, the apostolic delegate in London. The proposed Vatican meeting accomplished appeasement. In particular, the Pope announced Poland to give Danzig to the Germans to avoid a war, which the Polish government refused. In August 24, 1939, a week before the disastrous war, the Pope said, "The danger is imminent, but there is still time. Nothing is lost with peace. All can be lost with war." A British historian, Owen Chadwick, drew four themes about Vatican's mediation attempts: a particular closeness to Mussolini, to the point of sending correspondence of drafting from the period May-August 1939, British and Polish disinterest in Vatican's proposals, which were suspected of being pro-Italian and pro-German. The major powers viewed Vatican as a no minor pawn upon their chessboard. With Poland overrun, but France and Low Countries yet to be attacked, Pius still believed to negotiate peace. Before the expansion of the war, and America established unofficial relations with Vatican due to similar views on preventing the war. Despite intense behind-the-scenes actions, Pius XII was resolved not to issue any public pronouncement that took sides in the conflict. This first manifested itself in a refusal to explicitly condemn the German invasion of Poland. Summi Pontificatus, or in English On the Limitations of the Authority of State, issued October 20, 1939, was the first papal encyclical issued by Pope Pius and established some of the themes of papacy. According to Chadwick, the Summi Pontificatus exemplified the hesitancy and the care of the pontiff. During the drafting of the letter, the Second World War commenced with the Nazi-Soviet invasion of Catholic Poland. Though couched in a diplomatic language, the Pope endorsed Catholic resistance and disapproved the war, the racism and the persecution of the Church. The Pope wrote of anti-Christian movements bringing forth a crop of poignant disaster and called for love, mercy and compassion, following themes addressed in his book. He wrote about bringing back to the Church the people following a false standard who strayed the relations with the God, who, among the soldiers of the Christ ecclesiastic or layman does not feel, himself incited and spurred on to a greater vigilance, to a more determined resistance by the side of the ever-increasing host of Christ's enemies, as he perceives the spokesman of these tendencies deny or in practice neglect the vivifying truths and the values inherent in belief in God as he perceives them, wantonly break the tables of God's commandments to substitute other tables and other standards, stripped of the ethical content of the revelation on Sinai, standards in which the spirit of the Sermon on the Mount and of the cross has no place. Pius wrote about the persecution of the Church in Poland and a time requiring charity for the victims who had rights for compassion. Monks, priests and people were killed in Poland and even wrote about it. The blood of countless human beings, even non-combatants, raises a piteous dirge over a nation such as our dear Poland, which, for its fidelity to the Church, for its service in defense of the Christian civilization written in indelible characters in the annals of the history, has rights to the generous brotherly sympathy of the whole world while it awaits, relying on the powerful intercession of Mary, help of Christians, the hour of a resurrection in harmony with the principles of justice and true peace. When in 1940, the Nazi foreign minister Joachim von Ribbentrop led the only senior Nazi delegation permitted an audience with the Pope and asked why he sided with the Allies, where he replied with a list full of Nazi atrocities against the human race and religious persecution. In 1942, the The Pope delivered a Christmas message on Vatican's radio where he was expressing his concern about the victims of the Nazis. By May 1942, the Nazis commenced the industrial slaughter of the Jews, named the final solution. The mankind owes that vow to the numberless exiles whom the hurricane of war has torn from their native land and, scattered in land of the stranger, who can make their own lament of the prophet, our inheritance, is turned to aliens, our house to strangers. Mankind owes that vow to the hundreds of thousands of persons who, without any fault on their part, sometimes only because of the nationality or race, have been consigned to death or slow extermination. The New York Times called the Pope as a lonely voice crying out of the silence of a continent. The speech was made in context with near total Nazi domination in Europe, although the war had turned in favor of the Allies. The Pope refused to say more, fearing that public papal denunciations would provoke Hitler's regime to commit even more brutal things on those subject to the Nazi terror, as it had when the Dutch bishops protested. Joseph Müller, a Bavarian lawyer, who served a military opposition against Hitler, decided to contact the Monsignor Ludwig Kaas, the exiled leader of the German Catholic Zentrum Party in Rome, hoping to use the Pope as an intermediary contact with the British. Kaas put Müller in contact with Father Robert Leiber, who personally asked the Pope to relay on British information about the German resistance. After one day, the Pope accepted to pass the information alongside the British. The negotiations were tense, and Western offensive was expected that could replace Hitler's government. The Pope even supported a coup in Germany. After the German invasion of Denmark and Norway, the Pope avoided talking to the German oppositions. The opposition largely dissolved after the conquest of France in summer of 1940. They feared Hitler's power. It only gained momentum in 1944 when the Germans were losing the war. The Vatican maintained a small force of troops known as the Swiss Guard. During World War II, the Vatican Swiss Guards obtained additional submachine guns and gas masks to supplement the existing Vatican arsenal in the event of an attack. With the German occupation of Rome in 1943, after the fall of Mussolini, came rumors about a plot to kidnap the Pope. The Vatican City itself was not occupied, but in fact the chief of concern within the state was a potential for lawlessness in the period between German and Allied occupation. Even though one of the Pope's main diplomatic priorities was to prevent the bombing of Rome, the capital was still bombed. So sensitive was the pontiff, who protested the RAF drooping of pamphlets over Rome, claiming that few landing within the city-state violated their neutrality. Before Americans' entry in the war, the bombing of Rome was not viewed as a strategic one, with little value. America wanted to bomb Rome, then the British also supported it. Pius similarly advocated for the of Rome as an open city after it was bombed twice on August 14, 1943. Although the Italians consulted Vatican on their wording of the Open City Declaration, the impetus had nothing to do with Vatican. Vatican was bombed twice during the war. The Allies liberated Rome on June 4th, and many Italians sought refuge in Vatican, but they were not allowed. The Allies visited Vatican to hear the Pope speak and for the Mass. Some tanks even drove into the city-state. The Pope was the greatest celebrity on that peninsula at that time.